Okay.
She's going to say her thing. Also, one more thing. I don't know how to edit the video, and I'm not going to learn because I'm just not going to. Um, audio will make it pretty, but the video, not so much. Here we go.
Okay.
So, correct me if I'm wrong, Terence, you got like 5 degrees, right? Or 17 degrees, something like that.
Seth, man, I have 4 degrees and I'm currently in a PhD program. So I'm halfway through that, studying public policy and social change.
I just wanted to make sure that I introduced you correctly. If you're a doctor, I want to lean into that. So I guess you're a master then, but I don't know what the right, maybe I don't know. You're a lot of things. So what would you say to people that are, by the way, let me back up. Welcome to the show. I don't know what happened. I think our easy chat at the beginning kind of got me out of my normal rhythm there. But welcome to the show. And what would you say to people when they're like, I don't know who, like I saw the name in the little iTunes show notes. So this dude's name is Terrence, but who is that? Like, what are you? And maybe more importantly, why are you that?
Yeah. Wow, that's a loaded question. Well, I think we have built a rapport before we actually started, but man, I don't normally like to describe myself in terms of things that I've accomplished or my education. If I was to describe myself, I would like to describe myself based upon the things that are passion for me. I am passionate about my wife, who I have been married going on 15 years in August. We'll
Nice.
celebrate 15 years. We married really young. I'm passionate about my children. My children are my legacy. I oftentimes tell people that I'm hustling for my last name and not my first. And I mean that through and through. I want my kids to be able to look at the life that I am living, the life that my wife is living, and feel a sense of empowerment from our family structure and our core values and what we stand for. I am passionate about service, specifically to those who are living on the margins of society or those persons who have been made invisible through laws and ordinances and political and social rhetoric. And I am also passionate about, man, just being a good neighbor to all people. And when I say good neighbor, I'm talking about uh, being a neighbor to all of persons in a community
Mm.
and extending tables instead of building walls. So that's what I'm passionate about.
Yeah. So my wife and I just celebrated our 15th. I have no idea when this will air, but we're in the middle part of June here. So we had our 15th at the first week of June there. It was great. Grandma watched all the kids at my house. So I didn't have to pay for childcare or dog care. Well, I always got to pay for childcare or you lose your spot, because I got to be at work normally. But yeah, so I don't know how old you are. Your skin looks younger than mine. Maybe you've been out in the sun less. I don't know. I don't think so. So I don't think that you could have got married too young because I feel like just looking at you, we got to be close. And I don't want to call myself old yet. I'm not willing to do that. How old are you, Terrence?
I am 38 years old.
Yeah,
So
definitely. I just turned 39 in May. So yeah, I didn't get married young and nor am I old. So happy 15th early, man. That's 15's a good year. 15's a good year.
yeah,
So
for sure.
the publisher of your book, they send me this book jacket like as a PDF, right? And in that, you're like all cleaned up. And I gotta say, like, I prefer this haircut and that beard. I'm a beard dude. And people that aren't, on Patreon can't see the video, but are you gonna keep this? Like when you back out and about, like, is this a thing? Like, I like this. This is much nicer
Yeah.
than that. Like, that was a PhD headshot for like a faculty like listing, is what that was.
Right. Yeah, I mean, I am I am settling into the hair growth. I love a beard now.
Hmm.
And
Saves a
I
lot of
have,
time.
yeah, I've grown my hair out, so I'm thinking I'm going to sit with this a while.
I like it. So there is a method to that madness. So one of the things of my stalking and sleuthing on the internet is you wrote a blog post recently and you referenced your current hairstyle.
Mm,
Um, and I have quite a few friends that happen to not be white, and they've also told me about things like that and like educating their kids. And you do a lot of things. You were underselling yourself in your little "Who am I and what am I?" Like you work at an intersection of like pastoral care, social work, justice, advocacy. I would argue maybe a prophetic voice. Like you've done a lot of things, and maybe you can correct me if I'm wrong if you feel like any of those are incorrect. But can you give some context? And I'll link, and I do a transcript for the show as well. I'll link for people that can't listen that want to read it. I'll link to it right here, right there. That nice word here will be linked. But for those listening, like I'd like to kind of start there because I think it would give a good perspective to dive off into some of the things I want to talk about as we launch into you got a book that just released and some of the work that you do and kind of why you do some of the work that you do.
yeah, yeah, for sure. Man, I am always a person that likes to talk about the intersection of my racial identity and culture, with being synonymous with my faith, because I am a Black man in America, and I have never had the privilege of separating who I am, my racial identity, from my faith. I can't separate those two things. I follow Jesus, and I still can be mistreated. I follow Jesus, but I still can walk into a restaurant to stand in line to purchase healthy food, and then have the manager, like I was talking about in this blog, come over to me and subtly harass me,
Mm.
looking at my hair, asking me what am I doing here? Why have I chosen to sit in a public setting? When I look around, I see people who are white sitting at other tables who are not being asked these types of questions. The security guard comes over as if I am causing some type of trouble. I was asked
Sitting
if
there.
yeah, sitting there. I had I was even asked if I had paid for my food, and I had to reach in my pocket and produce the receipt. But it started to make me realize that in certain settings, um, that even as a person who is pursuing a PhD, has multiple degrees, literally I give my life sacrificially to be proximate and present with a community of persons who are without homes. None of that matters because all persons see is my skin color or how I wear my hair. And it's always interesting being in those circumstances, because when you're going through it, it feels very traumatizing and shocking, but later you get a chance to process what happened, to pull out or mine out some type of lesson to communicate to a much larger audience. And that's what I try to do with how I live my life or the personal experiences that I go through. I'm always looking for ways to take moments and turn them into teaching moments for other people. And so, if you have been discriminatory towards a person of color who has had longer hair or natural hair, um, I would definitely encourage you to be very conscious and be aware of your mannerisms and your behaviors and things that could be damaging to persons who should also be included.
Yeah. Can I ask probably hopefully an appropriate but definitely an ignorant question?
Yeah,
Because my kids have asked me this before because we'll talk about implicit and unconscious biases. We've talked about this for their daycare, for their school, for our
yeah,
neighbors. Like, we live right next door to a gentleman's name. I'm not going to say his name because he didn't give me permission. That happens to be black. The guy before him was not black, and we have just a good relationship. It doesn't really matter who, because he's good people. I like him. He's very kind, and he loves all my kids sometimes when they're out there playing. So I got no issues with him. But as a person that I've never had to deal with that, Terence. Like I was born with the right amount of pigmentation that for the most part people leave me alone. what is the role of someone else sitting in the setting that you're in, or really in any setting, that hopefully claims to be a Christian? So we're supposed to love everyone and do what we're supposed to be doing. And even if they don't, I think that the morality of the world would say that's not how we treat people. What should someone like me do? Like if I'm observing that happen, like what is the right response?
Mm, yeah, you brought up those two forms of biases. I'll just start with the unconscious bias. Um, it was years ago when ML King was talking about the differences between de jure discrimination and de facto discrimination. De jure discrimination had to do with laws that were actually put in place that discriminated against Black people in this country. You can't drink at this water fountain. You
Mhm.
can't vote. You have to have a certain amount of education to fill out a voter registration card. I mean, Black codes, all of the laws
Mhm.
that emerged from Jim Crowism, and so that was being discriminated against by law. Well, when some of those laws begin to be wiped away and abolished, that didn't mean that the behaviors or the posture of heart changed, right? That's when it became de facto. De facto describes the behaviors and the practices or the disposition that still embodies the laws that weren't in existence anymore. And I think unconsciously, a lot of the behaviors and practices have been passed down, and subconsciously, it is still a form of discrimination that persons of color have to go through, whether you know it or not. It's just been embedded within the context of culture. Uh, as a Black man, I would like to see my white counterparts or my white persons that stand in solidarity with the struggle speak up, you
Like in the
know,
moment, like right
in
then.
the moment, right there. Think about it. I was sitting at this table and I went from being a patron or somebody who is patronizing this business to being a person who is on display. And nobody said nothing. I became this weird character in a metaphorical stage play, if you will. And I was becoming entertainment to people as opposed to people leaning in and speaking up. Um, I think after speaking up, this whole notion of creating these type of rhythmic practices in your life where you are uh, doing things that are outside of your normal routine is appropriate. For instance, I was giving a talk the other day, and one of the questions came up, and they were like, "Well, how do I escape my bubble?" And I'm like, "Well, the only reason you're in the bubble is because you're doing things that are routine for your
Mhm.
bubble.
Mhm.
Go outside of your comfort zone. If you shop at a white coffee shop, go to another part of town where you can purchase coffee in a community that is not your own. What I'm basically talking about is, starting to in like develop this idea of what proximity and presence really means. But you have to start with speaking up.
Yeah. So see, it's like you're a professional speaker, because where I wanted to lean was your new book, which again, I told you, I think before we recorded, that I haven't had the ability to read more than the first chapter. And I don't ever ask first chapter questions, Terence, because I feel like that's for people that did not read the book. Like they put in the minimal amount of effort. And then also full disclosure, I usually read every single word of whatever we're going to talk about before I do, because your
Yeah.
time is valuable. So that's why I want to be so upfront with that. But your new book, from what I can tell, and from videos that I've watched and other people writing about writing about the book and the endorsements, especially from Father Boyle, like you're making the case that like proximity is the way of life that we need to get to. Like community is the way of life. But I'd like to start maybe, and let me back up. So the book is When We Stand, the power of seeking justice together. That way
Yeah.
you don't have to say it, and because why not? But I don't think that most people have a good concept for what community is. I think most people say community is the people that I see day in and day out, which is slightly different from what you're saying for someone trying to actually help bring a little bit more shalom into the world, to use a fancy word. But since you've got 17 degrees, we're there. I do not, but I've read a lot of books. Like, how would you define community in the sense that you want people to kind of understand it for the work that you do?
Yeah. Yeah. I think community is um, something that has been abused. Well, the term itself, um, because we have to ask, whose community?
Mm,
Are we talking about the community within the context of a dense neighborhood that has redeveloped homes, that has gates around their subdivision? Are we talking about that community, or are we talking about the community that has a private school also in the same dense neighborhood that looks like a college campus, but it's for K through 12 students?
mm,
But a block over is a food desert for those other quote unquote residents in the community.
yeah.
So we always have to start with whose community. And I start there because when I talk about community, I am talking about the whole community. Um, I am talking about when persons within the context of that community have been made aware that they are not the only ones in the community. Um, I've been asked several times about people without an address, and how do you build relationships and be proximate to people who may be impoverished. And I normally respond with a conversation that I had with a well-known friend of mine. He was talking about how he had the privilege of uprooting out of a suburban neighborhood and moving into a really dense area. He's been there for 40 years. And before he moved into this community, he always saw persons who struggled with poverty and lack of access as being persons who were lazy and not wanting to put in hard work. But then he said he moved closer in proximity, and slowly the struggles of the community became his own struggles.
Mm,
um, that when he was in church with his neighbors, who probably didn't bring in the same amount of income that he brought in, but he started to hear the concerns of rents, mortgages, and rent payments being raised because the area was being gentrified. That they were literally in church praying to God that they would make it through and have enough to cover the inflation, but still knowing that they probably wouldn't, and they would be displaced because of the gentrification. He said their concerns became his concerns.
mm.
And when I see community, I'm talking about it's this shared sense of humanity, and it's this shared sense of togetherness within the context of community, and includes everyone in it, not just those who have been isolated.
Yeah. Are you a fan of rap music, Terence?
I am, brother.
So my favorite, amongst my favorite artists, is Propaganda. And honestly, this is like, I think, the third episode in a row. Now, I'm not going to release these in a row, so listeners won't probably catch up on that. And I might even edit this out because that way it feels like. So all I've been doing is listening to his new album, Terraform. I don't know if you've listened to that album or not. If you haven't, I think it's going to, have you heard it?
Not yet.
Dude, do it today. It's just 6 songs. So I don't even know if that's technically an album, but it goes with the book that he just released, which I also haven't read. But his very first song reminds me a lot of what you just said. So I'll just read you the intro real quick. So he says, "Let me tell you about this shorthand me and you use. It's how we decide if somebody is safe. There's talking points. That's how you know if they are in the fence or outside of the fence, whether you're safe or not. But I
Hmm.
suggest a redo because, like it or not, we are all that we got."
Mm,
Which that last line, like it or not, like this is the community, like it or not, we are all that we've got. My problems are your problems. My faith is
yes.
maybe your faith. Your faith is my
Yes.
faith. Your
Yes.
kids need to succeed because I live here. Like I live here, and your kids will one day help take care of me, and I'll help take
Mm,
care of them. You know what I mean? Because I live here, regardless
yes.
of their politics or whatever. Um, so your book, what are you getting at in that book? Again, I'm sure there's 250 pages there. So there's a lot there. What is the overarching narrative and the goal of the book as you're seeking to talk about community and justice?
Yeah, that you know, that true justice happens when persons decide to come together. I take a lot of ML King's writings when he uses languages like world house or global village or interconnectedness. There's a sermon that he gave in 1967. It's a Christmas sermon where he's talking about when you wake up in the morning, you can't start your day without having a global encounter. You know, he's talking about where you got your cup of coffee from.
Mm,
Where did you get your shirt from? Who made that? You know, the decor in your house. He's helping us to see the entire world as an address as opposed to only your physical address, helping us to understand that we are all in this life together. And I take that framework and I'm trying to push people to see themselves as being contributors to the collective um, fabric of social change by connecting with their neighbors. Like I often ask, what are you doing in your context right around you? Um, and many times people think that they don't have anything to offer
mm,
or that what they may offer is too small. And what I'm suggesting that if you give of your gifts or talents or whatever it is that you bring to get to the table, connected with other people's offerings, then that's how we truly start to see change happening within our local context. And I think true change happens locally and it spreads across the country and across the globe. And most persons are overwhelmed in trying to tackle an entire issue by themselves as opposed to locking arms with people right around them to make a difference right in their own communities.
yeah, my lights just flickered. So
Mhm.
I think the light's going bad. So it's probably going to happen again. We'll have a little strobe effect happening here. So I want to ask a question about self worth. And I keep being reminded of a conversation I had with Dr. Richard Beck, who's a psychologist out of Abilene Christian University. Talked about
Mm,
how most people are averse to things that are not in their bubble. Like there's like a spit test. Like you take spit in your mouth right now and swallow it, you're fine. You spit it in a Dixie cup and try to swallow it immediately. It's not even contaminated. It's still your spit and you can't drink it. You can't do it because it's left you. Um, and so there's like a concept of self. And so as you are witnessing with people and you've got your organization Love Beyond Walls, right? That's the name of the organization that you helped
yep.
start. I think you helped start. And then hopefully partnering with churches and cities and mayors and city councils and maybe school boards, like what has changed for your version of the concept of self and in relation to other people's concept of self to help prepare that? Because I think most people ignore the people in our community, the homeless, the people disenfranchised, the people that were in the same place that you were, you know, while you're getting abused because you got the wrong haircut while you're trying to eat. You know better than that. You got to clean up. Um, like
Yeah.
what how has your concept of self changed me over the last decades as you worked through this work, and then how are you helping to communicate that to organizations and people that can then take that and maybe further that ministry?
Yeah. Man, I'll never forget having a conversation with um I was on staff at a church and one of my best friends, I think I was like 27 and one of my best friends was 68. Um, his name was Mr. Gene, and Mr. Gene and I would sit around and like have coffee and talk. And I'll never forget him telling me that there were two types of people in life. He says there are accumulators and then there are distributors. Um, and he was talking about himself because he was in a phase of life where he was downsizing and he was starting to distribute a bunch of stuff. And he says, man, I missed a bunch of years collecting a bunch of stuff, and I could have been living my life distributing and living with open hands, as Harry Nowen talks about. And I'll never forget taking that and like just really sitting with that and wanting that to shape how I live my life, how I raise my family, uh, to know that we aren't just being accumulators, right? We're not just focused on, amassing a bunch of stuff or amassing a bunch of titles and just like being about ourselves, but we are seeking to understand how can we take those things that we have been graced to possess and steward and be distributors of goodness and justice and all of those things in the world around us. And so that is at the core of who I am. So when I walk into spaces, I'm communicating messages that call people to think outside of themselves, to think about what's around them, to push back against this psychology bias that you're talking about, to push back against this notion of just being about self, because I think we have all of those messages around us all of the time to be about yourself, to amass a bunch of stuff. I mean, we're marketed to daily,
Mm.
and it creates a type of selfish and indifferent and apathetic culture. And normally, when I go and I am working with organizations and giving talks and stuff, I'm trying to help people to see how they can be a good representation of what home is. And I define home, even in my last book, as a place where you feel seen, accepted, and you feel like you belong.
Mm.
How are you creating a space or spaces within the context of your life where people feel seen, accepted, and feel like they belong? And no matter if you have an address or not, you're still a neighbor. As a matter of fact, you don't need an address to be considered a neighbor. In the words of Jesus, that all are worthy, and that's what I love doing. That's my passion,
Yeah.
and that's the lens, bro.
How do you how do I don't know how to ask this question in the best way. So I feel like I teeter totter between intentionally doing it well and then unintentionally not caring if I'm doing it well. And then realizing that and then trying to do it well. And I think a
Mm,
lot of that is because of the inputs coming in, between Facebook, Twitter, algorithms, the news only
mm,
telling me the things that are going to sell ads. So it's always the most hyperbolic stuff and the most vitriolic stuff. So how does
yeah.
someone kind of sit and cut through all of that crap, for lack of a better word, and then like focus on what matters? Like, how do you practice things to kind of, okay, here's the line, the rest doesn't matter, here's what does matter?
Yeah, man. I think I don't know. I think I've just fashioned my mind to see diet as being more than just food. Um, Diet is essentially more than just food. It's what you watch, it's what you consume, it's who you listen to, it's who you allow to influence you. It's the type of um, messages that you hold dear to your heart. It's the confirmation bias
Mm,
sometimes, that you're only searching for things that affirm your
yeah.
core beliefs. It's not putting yourself in a place where you are challenged. And I've just always been a person to be very intentional about um, allowing the consumption of things to not just be about what I'm eating on a plate. There's some times where I'm really intentional about not being on social media a lot, although My accounts are set up where there's a rhythmic posting. I write a lot. There are times when I'm being intentional in the conversations that I'm having. I love to have conversations with people who don't even think like me,
Mm,
which has been one of the hugest blessings in my life because it gives me an opportunity not only to grow, but to challenge the ways that I think and open my heart up and posture myself to really wrestle with if something that I've been holding in my heart is true or false. And if it's false, and if I come to that conclusion, being courageous enough to let it go,
yeah.
right? Which has been a really powerful thing of growth. And then for me, man, I'm constantly asking what will come of my life. It reminds me of that passage that Jesus, when he was talking about, I think he said some words like, what profits a man to gain the whole world and then lose his soul? Well, I interpret that as, you know, what are you going after? What are your priorities? And for me, I've just always been a person that prioritized my life around things that I'm really passionate about and created the margin in my life to literally give of myself to those passions. Most people have a lot of passions and they are willing, they just don't have the availability.
Mm.
It's not a matter of willingness, it's a matter of availability. And I think that is a priority question that you're asking. So,
Yeah. So I want to end. So I'm running up against here in a minute. I actually have to go to work. I want to end with a couple longer form, deep questions that you can answer in a sentence or you can answer in a book. It doesn't matter to me.
yeah.
One of them is I finally decided to just play on the sarcastic name of the title of the podcast because I figured why not? It's been there for long enough, and I intentionally left it alone, and now I will. So you have a lot of experiences that I think many people just don't experience. I mean, you spent we skipped a lot of your story. Like you spending time intentionally being homeless so that you could
Yeah.
get like that perspective. You've done things that most people don't do. I was watching one of the documentaries, I think on some website, like literally you're like, no, I'm just going to go down here with a sandwich board and we're going to get this dude a job. Like you do things that don't, that don't, that most people don't do. So what do you as a congregant of a faith community feel like we should be allowed to talk about at church, but we don't? And people are like, yeah, you can't say that at church. Like, we don't talk about that here. That's the wrong boat to be rocking. And then what if we did? Like, what would change?
Yeah. Gosh, Chef. That is the question of the hour. Man, I think I would want to see churches talk more about um,
And I don't
how
necessarily mean from the pulpit either. Like, I just mean anyone in that faith body.
anyone in the faith body.
Yeah. Yeah. Like, I don't necessarily mean like the preacher telling people what
Okay,
to talk,
yeah, yeah.
like
Okay,
literally,
that's
like,
good.
yeah.
Yeah, man. I wish people in church or people in the congregations would talk more about um, how churches sometimes use poor people to feel good about themselves.
Hmm.
And the reason I say that is because, you know, obviously with the work that I do from our organization, we always have a lot of faith-based communities get involved, and they come in, they swoop in, and they throw a bunch of money at stuff, and everybody's happy, and they take pictures, and then they go back, and nobody ever sees them again.
Hmm.
And I'll never forget having a conversation with a kid who received a bike for Christmas because the church wanted to donate bikes because that was cute. Um, and the young man didn't even know how to ride a bike
Hmm.
because nobody ever taught him. And that is the reason I'm talking about proximity and presence so much. Every now and then we'll have some congregants who will come and they'll be for the event, but the event grips their heart and it changes them, and they want to move from an event mindset to a lifestyle mindset, and they dwell, right? And I think we need to have a real intentional conversation about how can we be more present and proximate and long lasting in communities as opposed to specifically poor communities, as opposed to just picking and choosing and then celebrating from stage or
Mm,
patting ourselves on the back
mm.
and saying we did the Jesus thing, but forgetting that Jesus dwelt among people.
Yeah, that is that bike story. That is a powerful image, I think, for the posture of most people, especially people with some wealth and some power. And the reason it, like when you said that, like I got some goosebumps. You can't see the goosebumps because I got dressed up for this convo. Nobody told you there was a dress code, but there definitely there definitely is. Um, my youngest daughter has a bike and she can't go on bike rides with us, and it's awful. And she'll tell you, I don't know how to ride the bike. No, and we try to show her, but there's a point where she's got to want to. We're trying to do it, but I can't imagine the point of view of the child, and especially as I think about that, like faith, like we're out here trying to get people saved, and no one's out here trying to help people living in a community. Like that's a
Mhm.
powerful. There's a lot there. That story is doing a lot more work. That I'm a wrestle with that today. I like that a lot. Um, yeah, I like that a lot. So, I got one, maybe two more questions. And then I'll give you back your day. So, when you try to describe like what God is, like someone comes up and correctly asks, "Hey, I don't want that junk. I just want to know when you try to say what God is, like what are you actually saying? What are the words that you're wrapping around whatever that is?"
Mm, that is a very it's a very deep question. Um, it reminds me of the story when I first started Love Beyond Walls. My wife and kids were dropping me off underneath the bridge for me to actually live as one experiencing homelessness. I had a house at this point, um, and my family allowed me to live on the streets for over a month, eating out of trash cans, sleeping on the bridges, being put out of shelters. I mean, struggling in the cold, having to stay up 24, 48 hours to keep warm. I mean, going through having beer cans thrown at me, all of these different things. I'll never forget one night specifically. Um, it started raining, had a wind chill of like 7 degrees. I walk over to my friend's tent. His name was Tony. Um, Tony had a terminal illness, and I asked him, and I said, Tony, man, how do you survive out here? It's cold, and my toes feel like popsicles. He goes into his tent. He gives me his last donated pair of socks. And he says, man, we just got to share it to make it.
Mm,
Man, I think that is what God is like. God is love in the midst of struggle. God is sacrifice in the midst of crisis. God is one that brings people together. And God is one that where when all of life has been stripped down to rubble, love is what the very thing that keeps you warm. Um, you know, um, a lot of my friends underneath that bridge that same night stood around a campfire, and we didn't have firewood, and so we had to burn donated clothes in this
mm,
campfire just to keep warm. And many of them talked about how churches would come and pass out flyers and everybody would leave. And when we started to talk about the reasons why I stayed, um, they started to talk about Jesus in this way that was very different from the way that we hear Jesus in the church. and I'm not Jesus. I'm just a follower of Jesus. And he says, man, many of us would see more of God if people start dwelt with us instead of left
Mm,
us.
mm,
So when I talk about how God, or I communicate God to people, specifically those without an address, I talk about God being a God who dwells in the power of relationships. Um, yeah, and that's the most powerful expression that I can communicate to a person, because what I'm saying is you are so worth it, um, that you um, that you that you are deserving of a community of people to see you and wrap their arms around
yeah. Yeah. I like that. I like that a lot. So I want to ask a question that you don't have to answer. And if you don't want to answer it, I'll edit it out, except for in this video. Because again, we've referenced, I don't know how to do that. And I'm not going to learn. So I was in stalking your Twitter timeline. You put on there that you're going to talk to NBC about Juneteenth this week, and that may have already happened. However, a lot of people that look like me learned about what Juneteenth was last year because a lot of businesses finally put their we will forfeit profitability, because this matters and Black Lives Matter, and you know what I mean. So
you. Yeah,
I'm curious if you would say, and again, this won't release in time for Juneteenth because that's just not
sure.
going to happen. But I think it would still be relevant. Like, what is the impact of Juneteenth? Because I saw yesterday, at least, and I don't think it's signed into law yet, but it looks like Congress has overwhelmingly said this is now a federal holiday, and maybe I'm wrong in that. Like, what is the impact of that? Just for someone, and it doesn't even have to be related to the church or theology, but since you're already preparing to talk to NBC, unless you already have. I just curious what you would say to that. And the reason I say you don't have to answer that is I know that puts you on the spot, and I don't want to make you speak like monolithically for all for everyone. Listen,
Yeah,
you know what I mean?
yes, yeah, yeah. Well, yeah. So yeah, I got a chance to record, um, some thoughts about Juneteenth and share that in a compilation that will come out later this week. Um, when I reflect on Juneteenth and what it means, I mean, firstly, I mean, gosh, man, these enslaved Africans in Galveston, Texas, um, here for the first time, General Order number 3, that declares their freedom, right?
A year ago.
And yeah, and here's the thing: the signing of the Emancipation Proclamation happened 3 years before they heard this news,
Mm,
right? And so this whole idea of what freedom really meant for enslaved Africans is that it was a delayed freedom.
mm,
um, and it needs to be recognized in my understanding of it, because it acknowledges the long road to struggle to freedom for Black people in this country, but it also educates people about a freedom that was delayed. um, and I support it because it gives me an opportunity to celebrate the collective history and heritage that speaks to you know the freedom of Black people. It validates my existence, but it also pays homage to people, and my ancestors, or our ancestors, that who were bought and enslaved and sold for profit. But it also commemorates this moment, that their sacrifice was not in vain. And it also reminds us to think about how much more work we have to do in terms of providing racial equity and racial
mm.
justice in this country. Um, and yeah, so that's my reflection on Juneteenth.
Yeah, delayed is the word there, right? That was delayed. Recognition of this day was delayed, and
Mm,
and
delayed freedom. Could
yeah,
you imagine being free and not even knowing it?
again, no, no, no. But it does make me question. That's where we're at. Like
Yeah.
that's where we've made it, and that's the on the delayed timeline.
Mm.
That's where we've made it. Like that took years to get delivered, and then that took what 200. I don't know how many.
200
So
years to be recognized.
the time operates at a that the time operates at a different level, which is really infuriating when you're wondering, all right, so what gets delayedly addressed maybe when my kids are my age? Like, what are we finally going to address then? You know what I mean?
Mm, mm.
I don't know, and that's not my voice to say, but it does make me wonder. Like, and I like your word of delayed there. I hadn't really considered it that way at all. Where do you plug the places that people need to do the things that they should be doing or that they already
Yeah,
should have been doing? Absolutely.
yeah. Well, man, if people want to look up the work that we do with our organization, they can check out lovebeyondwalls.org or follow us on Facebook, Instagram, or Twitter. That's at Love Beyond Walls. If they want to look me up, if they care to, I'm Terence Lester. That's IMTERENCELESTER. And if you want to check out When We Stand, and you've been, just overwhelmed with all of the injustices of the world, and you're looking for a practical way to get involved in community, check out When We Stand: The Power of Seeking Justice Together, wherever you buy books.
Cool. Thank you very much, Terence, for your morning and for your time, and also for your still delayed breakfast. We're just going to lean on that delay. So.
No, it's intentional. It's intentional.
All right, I'll hit that there, and I'll make this lady say recording stop.